Jada Mims. All right, Ms. Mims, good morning again. Ma'am, you've got 2 second-degree felony charges of failure to stop and render aid after an accident involving death. Both of these cases are warrant cases. That means that a judge has already determined that there is sufficient probable cause for the cases to go forward. I am still going to ask the Assistant DA to read us some of the details from the warrant so that you and I both know what you're accused of. Ms. Pira, please, whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Auto pedestrian crash that occurred on March 30th, 2019 at 800 North Shepherd Drive in Houston, Harris County, Texas. On that date, this officer was called out to the crash scene at that location in Harris County, Texas. When he arrived, he spoke with an officer who arrived before him and learned from that officer that 2 individuals, the complainant Lisha Adams and complainant Jesus Perez, were attempting to cross Shepherd Drive going left to right when they were struck by a vehicle. This officer learned from from the other officer who arrived first, that the driver of the vehicle that struck these individuals had initially left the scene, but had returned by the time that this officer arrived. This officer learned that the driver of the vehicle that struck the complainants, Adams and Perez, was identified by her Texas driver's license number as Jada Mims, hereafter referred to as the defendant. This officer spoke with the defendant and was told by her that she was driving her vehicle when something hit her car, and she couldn't see through the windshield anymore because of the damage. She also stated that she stayed in a parking lot next to the scene because she couldn't drive her vehicle. This officer learned that the passenger of the defendant's vehicle, Jasmine Brown, spoke to Officer Ramos, who Ramos, the passenger of defendant's car, stated that she was in the vehicle when the defendant struck both complainants, and the defendant initially stopped and looked at the damage to her car. Then defendant drove to the defendant's grandfather's house. This officer spoke with the defendant's grandfather, Norman Mims, and learned that the defendant drove to his house after the crash, and the grandfather told the defendant, after she had told him that she had struck something, wasn't sure what it was, he told her that she needed to return to the scene of the crash. The defendant asked her grandfather, Mr. Mims, if she could drive them back over to the scene, and told him that he needed to return to the scene with her vehicle. While speaking to the defendant, this officer learned that the defendant did not contact 911, nor did she return to the scene of the accident after realizing that she had struck something. The defendant stated that she stayed in the parking lot next to the crash for only 3 to 5 minutes, but she did not mention going to her grandfather's house. When asked if she went to her grandfather's home, she actually said she did not, which is contrary to what both Jasmine Brown and Norman Mims told the officer. This officer was able to observe the defendant's vehicle, which had sustained damage. And the officer observed blonde hair in the windshield of the vehicle, which would have been visible to the defendant based on the evidence collected at the scene, including video evidence and the statements of the defendant, Ms. Brown and Mr. Mims. The defendant had been gone from the scene of the crash for around 30 minutes before returning to the scene. This officer learned that complainant Adams was attempting to assist complainant Perez across the street when they were struck. Complainant Perez was in a wheelchair, and both complainants were killed by the injuries sustained from the crash. And that the defendant also immediately left the scene, making no attempt to determine if any person involved in the crash required aid. Furthermore, the defendant did not immediately return to the scene of the crash, but instead left the scene, Your Honor.
All right, anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Mims, as I said, another judge has already determined that there is sufficient probable cause for this case to go forward. Both cases are going to go to the 183rd District Court, and that's going to be Judge Chuck Silverman. Will you need a court-appointed attorney from Judge Silverman?
Yes.
Would you like the assistance this morning of Attorney Jasmine Henderson from the Public Defender's Office? Ms. Pira, what is the state's request on bond, please, from Ms. Mims?
Your Honor, the state is requesting a $50,000 bond in each case, Your Honor.
Ms. Henderson?
Yes, Your Honor. On behalf of Ms. Mills, I'm requesting personal bond in both cases, not to exceed $10,000, Your Honor. Ms. Mills has no criminal history, absolutely no prior violent convictions nor any felony convictions, Your Honor. I would like the court to be aware that from the address of the crash, 800 North Shepherd, to her grandparents' residence at 1002 Lawrence Street, it's only a distance of 0.4 miles, Your Honor. Ms. Mills has been living with her grandparents for a little over a year now. She's 20 years old. She does have a 1-year-old son that she's currently the sole provider for. Her son's father is currently incarcerated. She obviously isn't receiving any assistance from him. She didn't have any money on her when she was arrested. The most that she can afford for bail right now is $200. Again, her grandparents are older. She hasn't been able to speak with anyone since she's been in custody either. Since this accident occurred, investigators immediately contacted Ms. Mims. She was speaking to them, cooperating with them. I know that the investigator met with her at least 2 times prior to her being taken into custody on this evening, Your Honor. But again, she cooperated with them and answered all questions that they did ask. The only assistance that she receives for her son was food stamps and WIC for him. She's currently trying to complete her GED. She only needs 2 more credits to complete that, Your Honor. But again, from the records that are available to me, Ms. Mills has absolutely no criminal history. I think there's a few discrepancies in the DIMS with her leaving the scene, and again, it's only a distance of 0.4 miles, Your Honor. But she did return to the scene. So again, in both of these cases, I am requesting a personal bond for Ms. Mims, Your Honor, and requesting that they not exceed $10,000 each.
Ms. Mims, I'm going to set your bond in each of these cases in the amount of $15,000.